The moment the front door clicked shut, I felt the air shift. She didn't kiss me goodbye. No hug, no lingering glance. Just a checklist on the counter, folded neatly between the mail and an envelope I'd left unopened for a week. Her handwriting looked sterile next to the utility bill. Rules, expectations, timesheet, check-in from the retreat. It might as well have been a lease termination. I stood in the foyer, watching dust catch in the early evening light. It had all felt abstract until now. Healing retreat. What does that even mean? Who was she healing from, me? Us. Her suitcase had wheels, but I didn't hear them roll across the tile. Maybe she carried it. Maybe she didn't want the sound of it following her out the door. The silence left behind wasn't peaceful, it was surgical. Precise. Meant to cut. I wandered the house like I'd just moved in. The kitchen smelled like her hand cream. A coffee mug sat in the sink, lipstick stain intact. Her side of the bed was still warm when I passed the bedroom on my way to nowhere in particular. It was only 7 p.m., but I didn't feel like dinner, or television, or anything. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and didn't sit down. Just stood by the window, watching the porch light flicker against the dark. I thought I'd feel angry, but all I felt was stupid. That was when I heard the car. Not hers. Different tires, slower pace. I moved to the door just as it opened. Her sister stepped inside like she'd been there all along. She carried a suitcase, nothing oversized, just enough to signal a stay. Her hair was damp. Her jacket smelled like rain and lavender shampoo. She smiled carefully, like someone who had practiced. Hey, she said. Hope it's not too weird I'm here. She asked me to stay a few nights. You know, check in, make sure you don't start eating out of the can. That earned a faint smirk from me. I appreciated the attempt at humor. I appreciated that she wasn't avoiding my eyes. Yeah, I said. Sure. Make yourself at home. The lie was instant, easy. This was never going to feel like home with her sister 10 feet away and my wife somewhere in the mountains trying to remember who she was before she met me. She took the spare room without asking where it was. She'd been here enough over the years. Christmases, birthdays. That time the basement flooded and she stayed for a week while they fixed her apartment. Back then, we laughed more. We were a team. Her room was 10 feet from mine. I heard the door close. I didn't ask if she was hungry. I didn't ask if she wanted anything. I just went back to the window, drained my glass, and stood there for what must have been an hour. When the silence got too loud, I walked the hallway. Not toward her door. Not really. Just near it. I paused outside the spare room long enough to hear nothing. Not even the rustle of sheets. At midnight, I was still awake. The house, for all its familiar corners, didn't feel like mine anymore. Without her in it, without the casual trail of her presence, her slippers, her late-night snack plates, the hum she made when she folded laundry, it felt gutted. Like something sacred had been pulled out without a trace of blood. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to overthink why it bothered me so much that she didn't even try to say goodbye properly. Not a miss you. Not even a lie like, I'll call tomorrow. At 2:03 a.m., I heard pacing. Slow. Uneven. Just beyond the wall that separated my room from hers. She was awake too. Maybe she was restless. Maybe she couldn't sleep in someone else's bed either. Or maybe she felt it too. That charged kind of quiet that presses against your chest when someone you loved isn't there anymore. 10 feet. That's all that separated us. 10 feet of silence. The first night passed without sleep. Not just for me. Her pacing continued until nearly dawn. I heard the creak of floorboards, the soft shift of weight when she sat on the edge of the guest bed. At one point, I thought I heard her whisper something, but I couldn't make out the words. Morning came and went without conversation. I made coffee. I left the second mug untouched on the counter, unsure if she wanted it or if that would somehow cross an invisible line. By the time I left for work, she was still in the guest room with the door closed. I told myself it was temporary. Just a few nights. Just until my wife centered herself or whatever new age phrase she was chasing in the woods. But by the third night, the silence had texture. It wasn't avoidance. It wasn't discomfort. It felt deliberate. That's when it started. It was just after midnight, the house pin-drop quiet, save for the occasional groan of old pipes. I couldn't sleep again, not because I was thinking about my wife, but because I wasn't. That scared me more than anything. I got up, walked the hall barefoot, and paused by the kitchen. I didn't expect to see light. But there it was, the low amber glow of the fridge door. She stood with it open, a glass of water in her hand, wearing an oversized hoodie and shorts that barely peeked beneath the hem. Her hair was tied up messily. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Hey," she said softly. I nodded. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Nope. I was thinking about sneaking out to the porch with a blanket, but figured I'd just get bitten by mosquitoes and regret it halfway through." I gave a half smile. "Well, I was going to microwave leftover pasta and regret that halfway through. So we're both making bad choices." She laughed. Quiet, genuine. I hadn't heard that sound in. God, it had to be months. Maybe longer. "Microwave away," she said, taking a step back so I could pass. It should have been awkward, standing there in silence while the microwave hummed. But it wasn't. We talked. Nothing big. Just memories. Her first dog, a bulldog named Murphy, who used to snore louder than her dad's old truck. My first car, a rusted-out Corolla with no AC and one working speaker. We laughed about it like we were kids swapping ghost stories at summer camp. Then things got quieter. She leaned on the counter, her arms folded, watching the red numbers count down on the microwave. "I know she's not really calling," she said suddenly. I looked up. "What?" "She told me she'd call you every few days from the retreat. Check in. But she hasn't, right?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Nope. Just a text. Need space. We'll call soon." "That was 2 days ago." She nodded. Figured. That's kind of her thing. Saying she'll stay connected, then disappearing completely when things get hard. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words sat heavy between us. "Do you remember," she said after a moment, "when we were kids and we used to spy on you too?" I raised an eyebrow. "Spy?" She grinned. "Yeah. When you and she first started dating. I was maybe 13. I'd listen at her door or hide behind the banister when you came over. I thought you were the coolest guy alive. This grown man with stubble and a leather jacket who somehow liked my sister. It was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen." I laughed. "I haven't owned a leather jacket since college." "You looked ridiculous in it," she said. "But confident." You made her laugh. She used to light up when you came into a room. I stared at the floor. That stopped a long time ago. She looked at me then. Not just glanced, but really looked. The kind of look that makes you feel like you've been seen in a way that's both comforting and dangerous. She changed, I said. I don't even know when. She just started drifting. And I kept pretending I didn't notice because I thought if I did, it would make it real. "You don't deserve to feel invisible," she said quietly. The microwave beeped. I didn't move to grab the plate. Neither did she. It was 1:22 a.m. The walls felt thinner. The air between us thicker. "Thanks," I said, and I meant it. "Anytime." She walked back to the guest room, pausing in the hallway before disappearing behind her door. I stood there a little longer, not touching my food, not quite ready for sleep. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the silence in the house didn't feel so empty. It felt shared. We never talked during the day. It wasn't a rule exactly, more like a shared understanding. She'd pass through the kitchen in the morning while I made coffee. I'd mutter, "Morning," and she'd nod without speaking. Then we'd go about our lives like two people house sitting the same property, careful not to intrude, never asking too much. But something had shifted after that first late-night conversation. Something real. Something dangerous. The next night, I didn't go to bed until I heard her pacing again. Same rhythm as before, slow, thoughtful, like each step was tied to a thought she didn't want to say out loud. At 12:47 a.m., I left my room and made my way to the living room. She was already there, barefoot, curled in the corner of the couch like she'd been waiting. She looked over the back of it, one eyebrow raised. "I was hoping I wasn't the only one," she said. "You're not." We didn't bother with small talk this time. The silence between us didn't need it. I sat down, keeping a cushion between us. It felt safe, stupidly, pointlessly safe, but we both knew what the space really was, a line we weren't ready to cross. She asked me if I remembered the trip we all took to Big Sur 6 years ago. Her, my wife, me, and a few others. I said I did. How the car broke down halfway up the coast, how we drank too much cheap wine under the stars, and she got into an argument with a raccoon over trail mix. "I was jealous of you that night," she said. "Jealous?" You looked at her like she was the whole damn universe. I wanted someone to look at me like that. I didn't know what to say. That moment, that memory, had felt warm once. Now it burned. We fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Not with touch, Not yet, but with presence. With timing. We avoided each other all day, and then, midnight would strike, and the house would exhale. The lights would dim. The air would change. It was only at night that we existed. We talked about everything and nothing. Old sitcoms we both loved. Her latest painting. She used to be an artist before work got in the way. The time my wife totaled her first car and called me crying from a Taco Bell parking lot. I stayed on the phone with her for 3 hours that night. I said, not because she needed it, but because I did. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I didn't realize until later she didn't want me to come. Her sister didn't say anything for a long time. Then, she always hated needing anyone. There was no bitterness in her voice, just something closer to grief. I started noticing things I shouldn't, like the way she remembered everything I told her, how I take my coffee, what music I used to play in the garage when I thought no one was listening. She noticed things too, like how I never sat on my wife's side of the couch, or how I always left one light on, even after I said I was going to bed. One night, she brought out a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. I figured it'd help, she said, offering a smile. Loosen the ghosts. I didn't ask what ghosts she meant. I just poured. We sat on the back patio, the sky smeared with stars, crickets humming in the distance. I hate her for leaving you like this, she said. I stared at the wine swirling in my glass. Don't say that. Why not? Because you're her sister. She shrugged. Blood doesn't erase betrayal. She wasn't wrong. That night, when she stood to leave, her arm brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fraction of skin on skin, but I felt it all the way to my ribs. She didn't apologize, and I didn't pretend not to feel it. The next morning, I walked past the spare room and found the door slightly ajar. Not open, just less closed, like she was inviting the air between us to move. I didn't look inside. I just kept walking. But that image stayed with me all day. That crack in the boundary. That unspoken invitation. That night, I didn't wait for her pacing. I just got up and walked toward the living room. She was already there, of course, wrapped in a blanket, knees pulled to her chest. We didn't turn on the lights. We didn't say much. The silence between words had changed. It wasn't absence anymore. It was tension. Wait. Hope. She turned toward me as I stood in the doorway, and in that second, I knew I was thinking more about her than I was about the woman who'd left me behind. That's when I realized. I looked forward to night more than my wife's calls. The storm came in without warning, the kind that feels personal. It started with wind, sharp, insistent, rattling the windows like it wanted to be let in. By the time the rain followed, the house already felt unsettled, every wall humming with pressure. I was in the kitchen when the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The sudden darkness felt intimate in the worst way. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rain pound the roof, the thunder rolling low and close. I told myself I'd light a candle, pour a drink, ride it out alone. That was the plan. Then I heard her knock. Not loud, just a soft rap on my bedroom door, almost hesitant. I opened it to find her standing there in sweatpants and a thin long-sleeve shirt, arms wrapped around herself. The hallway was pitch black behind her. Power's out, she said, as if I hadn't noticed. Her voice was light, but her eyes gave her away. And I forgot how creepy this house sounds when it's dark. I stepped aside without thinking. Yeah, come in. She hesitated for half a second, just long enough to matter, then crossed the threshold. I grabbed an extra blanket from the chair and handed it to her. Our fingers brushed. Again, nothing. And everything. We sat on opposite ends of the bed, backs against the headboard, knees drawn up under blankets. The rain hit harder, the thunder closer now, shaking the windows. I struck a match and lit the candle on my nightstand. The flame threw soft shadows across her face, made her eyes look darker. Remember when storms used to feel cozy? She asked quietly. Before everything felt loaded? I said. She nodded. Before silence meant something was wrong. We talked in low voices, like the house might overhear us. About childhood storms. About the first place I ever lived alone. About the way my wife used to crawl into my arms during thunder and how, somewhere along the way, she stopped needing that. The power didn't come back. The room stayed dim and warm, the air heavy with rain and something else neither of us named. At some point, her shoulders slumped. She yawned, tried to hide it. You can stay, I said before thinking. I mean, just until the storm passes. Okay, she replied, just as quickly. We didn't lie down at first. We just sat there, listening to the rain, the candle burning low. Eventually, her head tipped back against the headboard, then slowly, carefully, rested against my shoulder. I froze. She didn't move away. Her weight settled, warm and real, and I became painfully aware of every place we touched. Shoulder, arm, the faint press of her thigh through fabric. My heart hammered. I told myself to move, to create space, to do the right thing. I didn't. Her breathing slowed. I glanced down and saw her eyes closed, lashes resting against her cheeks. She hadn't undressed, hadn't changed. Nothing about this was deliberate. And yet, her hand slipped, barely an inch, and came to rest on my arm. Not gripping, not searching, just there. I stared at the ceiling, muscles tight, afraid to breathe too deeply. The storm raged outside, thunder cracking overhead, rain pounding in sheets. Inside, everything was impossibly still. She slept. I didn't. I stayed awake for hours, memorizing the weight of her hand, the rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair smelled faintly of soap and something warmer beneath it. Desire curled low in my stomach. Not sharp, not frantic, but heavy, complicated, full of consequence. At some point, the storm softened. The rain slowed. The candle burned out. Still, neither of us moved. When morning light finally crept through the curtains, her eyes fluttered open. She realized where she was, where her hand rested. For a second, she didn't pull away. Then she did. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's okay," I said, just as quietly. We didn't talk about it. She gathered her blanket and stood, pausing at the door. "Good night," she said, even though it wasn't. "Good night," I replied. When the door closed behind her, my arm still felt warm where she'd touched me. And I knew, without question, something had crossed, even without touch. Morning made everything awkward. Sunlight stripped the night of its excuses, turned memory into something exposed and undeniable. I heard her moving around the kitchen before I even opened my eyes. Soft footsteps, the clink of a mug, the low hiss of the kettle. Ordinary sounds, but charged now, like they carried meaning they hadn't earned yet. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, she was already dressed. Jeans, a loose top, hair pulled back. Normal. Safe. She didn't look at me right away. "Morning," she said, like nothing had happened. "Morning." We stood there, 10 feet apart, the same distance as before, but it felt different. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with everything we hadn't said. She poured coffee and slid a mug toward me without asking how I took it. "Cream, 1 sugar." She remembered. "About last night," I started. She cut a glance toward me, quick but steady. "We don't have to make it into something." I nodded. "Okay." And just like that, we didn't talk about it. The day passed in fragments. Emails I didn't read. Calls I half listened to. Every quiet moment pulled my mind back to the weight of her hand on my arm, to the way she'd slept so close without meaning to, or maybe without admitting she meant to. That night, we didn't pretend. We didn't wait for pacing or storms or power outages. She was already in the living room when I came down, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back against the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. "Want some?" she asked. "Yeah." I sat a few feet away, not next to her, not across. Somewhere in between. The television stayed off. The house felt suspended, like it was holding its breath. "Do you ever think," she said slowly, "that some lines only exist because we're afraid to admit we want to cross them?" I took a sip of wine, let the question hang. "Every day." She smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "I don't want to hurt her." "I know. I don't want to hurt you either." That made my chest tighten. "I'm already hurting." She nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. "Me too." The conversation shifted after that. Became heavier, more honest. She told me about growing up in her sister's shadow, how my wife had always been the one people noticed first, the one who took up space effortlessly. "I learned early how to make myself smaller," she said. "Quieter. Less complicated." I watched her as she spoke, really watched her. The way she tucked her leg in closer when she talked about feeling overlooked. The way her voice steadied when she admitted things she probably hadn't said out loud before. "I don't feel married anymore," I said, surprising myself with how easily it came out. "I feel archived, like something she already lived through." She looked up at me then, held my gaze, didn't flinch. "That's how I felt my whole life," she said softly. "Like the version of me that mattered was always in the past, or in someone else's story. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intimate, dense. She shifted closer, not touching, but close enough that I could feel her warmth. Close enough to notice the subtle scent of her skin, the slow rise of her chest as she breathed. My body reacted before my mind could stop it. A low, undeniable awareness. Not hunger exactly, something deeper. Need mixed with restraint. She noticed. I knew she did. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then back to my face. "We're playing with fire," she said. "Yeah, but I don't want to stop talking to you." "Neither do I." We sat there for a long time, saying everything except the one thing that mattered most. The clock ticked. The house creaked. Somewhere far away, a car passed, its headlights briefly sweeping the wall. Finally, she stood, walked toward the hallway, stopped just short of the guest room door. She turned back to me, her expression open and steady and terrifyingly clear. "If something happens," she said, choosing her words carefully, "it won't be a mistake." She closed the door behind her before I could respond. I stayed on the couch long after, heart racing, body tense, knowing with absolute certainty that we'd already crossed something. Even without touch, the line wasn't drawn anymore. It was something else now, a breath between us, a pause before contact, a quiet that pulsed with expectation. There were no more rules. Not really. Just echoes of ones we hadn't said out loud, pretending they still mattered. That night, I didn't hear pacing. I didn't wait for the hallway light to flick on. I didn't need to. I stood outside the spare room, hand hovering over the doorknob, heart racing like I was 17 again and about to ruin something sacred. Or maybe finally touch something that already was. I didn't knock. She was sitting on the bed, cross-legged, wearing the same hoodie she'd been living in, hair undone around her shoulders, one knee bouncing softly like she wasn't sure if she wanted me there, or just didn't trust herself if I was. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't smile. But her eyes told me everything. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "Me neither." I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The sound was too loud, too final. She flinched slightly, not away from me, but from the moment itself. It felt like we were standing at the edge of something that wasn't supposed to happen, but also had been happening for days. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. I sat on the bed, keeping space between us. "Not much. Not enough. I don't know what this is," I admitted. "I just know it doesn't feel wrong." She turned to face me, bare knees brushing mine now, close enough that I could feel the heat off her skin. "Maybe it's not," she said. And then she kissed me. It wasn't desperate or fast. It was slow, thoughtful, like we both knew we wouldn't get to pretend it hadn't happened. Her lips were soft, but there was tension in the way she held my face, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to pull me closer or stop herself entirely. But she didn't stop. Neither did I. The first kiss broke with a sigh. Her forehead rested against mine for a moment. Just breathing. Just existing in the space we'd denied for too long. When I kissed her again, it was different. Less permission, more hunger. Her hands slid beneath my shirt, fingertips skating across my ribs like she needed to memorize something before it was gone. I kissed her harder, deeper, like I'd been starving for years and hadn't even noticed until now. We didn't rush it. That was the most dangerous part. It wasn't frantic or messy or fueled by impulse. It was deliberate, honest. Every movement was careful, reverent, like we were rewriting something broken and daring to believe it might be real. Her body moved against mine in ways that didn't feel borrowed. Her breath hitched when my hands slid down her back. She didn't hide. She didn't hesitate. We didn't speak. Not when I pulled her shirt over her head. Not when she tugged mine off with shaking fingers. Not when she leaned back on the bed and I followed, pressing against her like she was gravity. There was guilt. Of course there was. But it wasn't sharp, not then. It was quiet, like a memory of something that had already ended, even if we hadn't said it out loud. After, we lay tangled in silence. Her fingers traced circles on my chest, small and slow, grounding. "This doesn't feel like cheating," she said finally. "I know. It feels like something that was always going to happen." I swallowed hard. "Do you regret it?" "No," she said instantly. Then softer, "But I'm terrified of what comes next." I turned toward her, brushed hair from her cheek. "Me too." She tucked herself into my side, her breath warm against my shoulder. The room smelled like skin and wine and something unspoken. It wasn't a mistake. It was something else. Something sharp and honest and impossibly fragile. And when she whispered, "We can't pretend this doesn't matter," I didn't argue. Because she was right. The spare room wasn't empty anymore. The first call came at 8:04 a.m. I was still in the spare room. She was curled against me, eyes closed, but not asleep, like she was afraid rest might erase what we'd just become. When the ringtone echoed from the nightstand in my bedroom down the hall, we both froze. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. We knew whose name was lighting up the screen. My wife. We listened to the sound of it ringing, echoing from behind that bedroom door like a ghost neither of us wanted to face yet. When it stopped, she finally looked up at me. "You should call her back," she said quietly. I nodded but didn't move. Neither did she. Eventually, she slipped out from under the blanket and wrapped herself in a robe, padding silently back to her room. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man I'd become. What kind of man waits until guilt passes like a fever? At 9:30, I called back. She sounded cheerful, lighter than she had in months. "Hey babe," she said. "Sorry I missed you. They had us doing some weird grounding exercise by the lake. How's everything?" How's everything? It hit like a slap, those words, that tone. Like we hadn't spent the last week in two different versions of our marriage. Like the space she asked for hadn't become something I was now quietly filling with her sister's breath and skin and sighs. Fine, I lied. Quiet. She talked for 12 minutes. Told me about her breakthroughs, her inner child, her morning yoga, her new friend named Lena who taught chakra dance. She didn't ask about me. Didn't ask if I missed her. Didn't ask if the house still felt like home. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table in silence, coffee gone cold in my hands. She stepped into the room behind me, her sister, now fully dressed, hair pulled back tight like she needed armor. She didn't speak, just poured herself a cup, sat across from me, and stared out the window. "This doesn't get to be easy," she said. "I know. She's still my sister. And she's still my wife." The silence between us shifted again. No longer seductive or thick with want, it was sharpened now. Real. Grown out of something no longer secret. But when her fingers brushed mine on the table, neither of us pulled away. We started living in slivers. Stolen hours between phone calls. Shared mornings filled with glances instead of touches. Whispers instead of kisses. The spare room wasn't hidden anymore, but it was sacred now, our only place untouched by daylight and consequence. Some nights we didn't even speak. We just lay there, side by side, breathing in rhythm. She clung to me like I was a raft in the middle of something that had no shore. And I held her because I didn't know how not to. But guilt has a way of leaking in. She started pulling away in small ways. Not refusing me, just retreating. Her laughs were shorter. Her kisses, slower to start. She'd sit with her knees pulled to her chest, like she was trying to fold into herself. "You're allowed to want this," I told her one night, tracing a line down her back. "I don't know what I'm allowed to want," she whispered. We both stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. My wife started calling more, sometimes twice a day, her voice always bright, always talking about the new me and how she couldn't wait to come home and start fresh. She said it like a gift, like forgiveness was already implied. "I just feel like I finally understand what I need," she said one morning, as I stood in the laundry room folding clothes that didn't feel like mine anymore. "And I'm so glad we took this space to figure ourselves out. I feel like we're going to be stronger than ever." I told her I was happy to hear that. I was lying. That night, her sister didn't kiss me. She climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and stared out the window. "When is she coming back?" she asked. I hadn't said anything. "She texted me," she explained. "Said she's feeling so much better. That she's finally ready to be a better sister. A better wife." There was something bitter in her laugh. She said she wants to reconnect with everyone she loves. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't want her to come back. Not like this. Not to a version of me that had moved on, but hadn't moved out. "I don't know what happens next," I said. She turned her head. Her eyes were tired, raw around the edges. "Neither do I. But we both knew it couldn't stay like this. Because even stolen love starts to feel like theft." And every call from my wife sounded more like a countdown. The first argument wasn't loud. That almost made it worse. No yelling, no slammed doors, just a quiet shattering of whatever illusion we'd been holding together with late-night whispers and shared bedsheets. The kind of argument that starts soft but leaves you scraped raw afterward. It happened in the kitchen. She was doing dishes. I came in, phone still warm from my wife's latest call. The return date had been set. Next Thursday, I said. She didn't turn around. I stepped closer. She's flying in mid-afternoon. She sounded excited. Still nothing. You okay? That's when she stopped scrubbing, hands still submerged in the sink, knuckles white. I don't want to disappear again, she said, not looking at me. I stepped beside her. You won't. You say that like it's up to you. She turned then, eyes sharp, not cruel, but tired in a way that felt deeper than sleep could ever fix. I'm not a placeholder, she said. I know how this story usually ends. The wife comes home, the affair becomes a regret, and the other woman becomes a secret everyone pretends didn't happen. You're not. She cut me off. Don't say I'm different, that you're not like other men, that this situation is special. Every man who cheats thinks his story is unique until the moment he's asked to choose. I leaned against the counter, heart thudding. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She laughed. Bitter. No, it wasn't. But here we are. There was a pause, long enough for the silence to fill with everything we were afraid to say. Then she added, I think about her more now than I did before this started. Isn't that messed up? I think about how she'll look when she walks in. If she'll know just by smelling the air. If she'll walk through this house and feel how different it is. I didn't know how to answer that, because I'd thought about the same thing. About her walking past the spare room and noticing the bed made differently. About her asking why her sister won't meet her eyes. You think I haven't felt guilty? I said. Every single day, I wake up wondering what I've broken. But I also wake up next to you, and it feels like the first thing that's been real in a long time. She looked at me for a long time, as if searching for the version of me she wanted to believe in. Then what happens when she walks through that door? She asked. I don't know yet. That's not good enough. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. I looked at the table, the same place we'd once sat with my wife, laughing over wine and takeout. The same table her hand had brushed mine on in the first moment we started becoming something more than shared grief. I'm trying, I said. She shook her head. No, you're avoiding. There's a difference. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just walked away, back down the hallway to the spare room that had somehow become both sanctuary and prison. I didn't follow. That night, the bed was cold. We didn't talk. No quiet footsteps crossing the floor. No whispered apologies in the dark. Just distance. 10 feet, like in the beginning, but with the weight of everything we'd poured into that space now pressing between us. The next morning, I passed her in the hallway. She didn't touch me. She didn't even look up. I'm going out, she said. Where? She hesitated. Nowhere important. The door closed behind her with finality. I sat in the living room and tried to imagine the future. Not just one, but both. One where I played along, welcomed my wife home with a smile and a lie. Another where I blew it all apart. But the truth was, I didn't trust either version. That night, she came home late. The silence was different now. Not charged, numb. She didn't sit beside me. She didn't pour wine. She didn't say a word until we crossed paths again in the hallway. If she comes back, she said, where does that leave me? I didn't answer. Because I wasn't ready. And maybe that was the problem. The house didn't feel like a home that night. It felt like a waiting room. Every door open. Every light dim. Every sound magnified by what wasn't being said. She didn't cook dinner. Neither did I. We moved through the house like ghosts occupying the same memory, careful not to touch anything we couldn't take back. Outside, the world kept turning. Cars passed. Sprinklers clicked on across lawns. Someone down the street laughed too loudly at something I'd never know. Inside, time stalled. I found her on the back porch around 9. She was curled into the chair with a blanket over her legs, a bottle of wine on the table, already opened. Her glass was half full, or half empty. It didn't matter. She didn't look up when I joined her. Just pushed the bottle toward me. I poured. Sat down. The air smelled like cut grass and regret. She texted again, I said. I know. She texted me too. We were both quiet. Tomorrow had become a shape in the distance. Vague, massive, and entirely unavoidable. She said she misses the way I used to look at her. I added. She said she misses me too, she said flatly. But I don't think she knows what that even means anymore. I took a long sip of wine. It burned more than it should have. Do you remember? She asked suddenly. The weekend we all went up to the cabin? Yeah, I said. 3 summers ago. She got food poisoning. Spent the whole time in bed. You and I sat on the dock. She smiled faintly. You told me about the first girl you ever kissed. I laughed so hard I dropped my phone in the lake. I jumped in after it. You didn't even hesitate. The memory was sharp and warm. I remembered the way her laughter had echoed across the water. I remembered the way she looked at me when I climbed back onto the dock, soaked and grinning like a fool. Back then, it felt innocent. Now, I realized it had been the beginning. We were already slipping toward this, I said quietly. She nodded, and I think we both knew it. A long pause. Then she turned toward me, eyes darker than the sky overhead. Do you love her? The question settled like fog. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the woman I married, her laughter, her ambition, her way of making any room feel brighter just by walking into it. I thought about the woman who packed her bags and said she needed space to find herself. And I thought about how I hadn't missed her. Not really. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I loved who we were, but I don't know who we are anymore. She didn't flinch. And me? That was harder. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud meant something had to break. I think I've been falling for you in pieces, I said. And I'm terrified that tomorrow, I'll have to choose which life to lose. She reached across the table, took my hand. Her fingers were cool. Steady. We already lost one, she said. We just haven't admitted it. There was no sex that night. No long looks or slow undoings. We didn't need any of that. What we had now was something more dangerous, honesty. We lay side by side in the spare room, not touching, just breathing. We talked about things we never meant to imagine together. Mornings with shared coffee. Vacations we'd never taken. What it would be like to not have to hide. She told me she'd always been afraid of being someone's second choice. I told her I was afraid of making the wrong first one. She laughed softly. We're a mess. I smiled. Yeah, but it's our mess. When the clock blinked past midnight, she turned to face me. The glow from the hallway stretched across the ceiling in thin, ghostly lines. Tomorrow changes everything, she said. And I knew she was right. Whether I chose her or didn't, whether the truth came out or stayed buried, the life we'd built in shadows was about to meet daylight. And daylight has no patience for secrets. She came back glowing. Sun-kissed skin. Loose hair that curled just slightly at the ends. A denim jacket she hadn't worn in years. She looked like a woman who had found herself somewhere and wasn't quite ready to hand that version back. She came through the front door just after noon. I was standing in the living room, pretending to scroll through emails, heart hammering in my chest. Her sister was upstairs. We'd said nothing to each other that morning. Barely a glance. It wasn't anger. It was the unbearable weight of knowing. And then she was there. Hey, stranger, she said, dropping her duffel by the door. I tried to smile. It came out wrong. She crossed the room in 2 easy steps and kissed my cheek, not my lips. A soft, casual thing. Something reserved for friends or family, not lovers, not spouses. You didn't text me back this morning, she said, slipping out of her jacket. I know. She gave me a look, curious, not suspicious. Everything okay? I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. She didn't press. She walked into the kitchen like she still lived here. Like her shadow still matched the walls. The house felt louder with her in it. Every drawer she opened, every glass she filled, every sigh that passed through her lips echoed. Not just through the rooms, but through the version of my life I'd been living without her. She talked about the retreat. How liberating it was. How she'd spent hours journaling by the lake. How she'd cried during breath work. How she'd learned to forgive herself. I even made peace with Dad, she said, pulling a salad from the fridge. I wrote him a letter I'll never send. It helped. I nodded, watched her, tried to imagine feeling what she felt. But all I could think about was the woman upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for me to make a choice I was now running out of time to avoid. She noticed. The way my shoulders stayed tense. The way I kept watching the hallway. What's going on with you? She asked. I turned to face her. What do you mean? You're off. Distant. Not even pretending to be interested in my spiritual rebirth, she said with a half smile. I opened my mouth again. Nothing came out. She stepped closer. Her hand touched my arm, and I flinched. Not from her, but from myself. Talk to me, she said, voice softer now. And that's when the stairs creaked. Not loudly. Just once. A step taken, then stopped. Her hand dropped. The moment bloomed in slow motion. She turned toward the sound, eyebrows furrowed. Is someone here? I didn't move. Couldn't. Then her sister appeared. She walked down the stairs slowly, wearing the same clothes she'd been wearing the night before. Her eyes locked on her sister's. Not a word spoken. Not yet. My wife's expression shifted, confusion to realization, realization to horror. No, she said. A whisper. A breath stolen. Her sister didn't look away. My wife turned to me. Her face pale. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. And I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't. It is, I said. Quiet. Honest. She stepped back. Like the words had pushed her. For how long? She asked. Silence. Her voice cracked. How long? I glanced toward her sister, who didn't speak. Her arms were crossed, like she was holding herself together. A few weeks, I said. My wife's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. You brought her into my home, she said. You left, her sister said quietly. That broke something. My wife spun toward her, voice sharp. That doesn't give you the right. It wasn't about rights, she snapped back. It was about being seen. Oh, don't you dare make this about you being the overlooked sibling. Don't you dare. You always made everything about you. And you used that to crawl into my husband's bed. The room was vibrating now. No yelling. No plates thrown. But the pain was pure, raw, and sharp. I stepped between them. Stop. They both stared at me like I was the problem. Because I was. My wife turned to me. You get one chance to fix this. One. Her voice cracked. Not with weakness, but rage barely held in check. Who do you choose? Her sister looked away. I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew then, clearly, terribly. There were no spare rooms left. The silence after her question didn't stretch, it dropped. Heavy. Cold. Absolute. Who do you choose? Her voice still echoed in the walls long after she said it. Not because she shouted. She hadn't. She didn't need to. It was the kind of question that demanded truth whether you were ready to give it or not. Her sister didn't move. Didn't speak. She stood halfway down the staircase, arms crossed, but I could see the tremble in her jaw. She was bracing for the answer. Bracing for me. My wife, on the other hand, looked like she'd already decided she wouldn't believe anything I said. Her arms dropped to her sides. Not relaxed, defeated. She wasn't angry anymore. She was done. I can't take it back, I finally said. She blinked. That's not a choice. I'm not pretending it was a mistake. I'm not going to stand here and spin this into a midlife crisis or say it meant nothing. Because it did. It does. Her breath caught, and I watched something fall in her. You're really doing this, she said. You're really choosing her. She wasn't asking. She was confirming what she already knew. I didn't plan this, I said. I didn't go looking for it. But it showed me what I stopped admitting a long time ago. She stared at me like I was someone else. Maybe I was. That we were already over? She asked. I nodded once. We just didn't say it out loud. She looked around the room like she didn't recognize it. Like the furniture, the walls, the paint on the cabinets. It all belonged to a life she no longer had a place in. This was supposed to be a reset, she said, quieter now. That's what the retreat was for. I worked on myself. I forgave you. I forgave me. I was ready to come back and try again. And that's what finally cracked me. You left, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't ask me how I felt. You didn't ask if I was okay. You packed your bags, said you needed to heal, and told me we'd talk when you were better. I took a breath. But I was still here. Still carrying it. And you decided to carry it with her instead. I couldn't argue that. I didn't fall for her out of spite, I said. I fell because she saw me. Because she listened. Because she stayed when you didn't. The words hung between us like the last thread of something already torn. She stepped back, blinking fast, jaw set. Then I hoped she was worth it. Her sister took one step down, but I raised a hand, just slightly. No, I said to both of them. Not like this. I turned to my wife. You deserve more than a house full of lies. More than half-truths and avoidance. And so do I. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and paused with her hand on the handle. This wasn't about her, she said without turning around. We were already gone. I just didn't want to believe it. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut like a sentence ending. Silence again. I didn't move for a while. I stood there in the center of the room, heart pounding, air thick, realizing that this wasn't relief. It wasn't victory. It was the sound of a life ending, and another beginning with no guarantees. When I finally turned, she was still standing on the stairs. She looked smaller now, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I didn't want you to choose like that, she said. I didn't want to win by default. You didn't, I said. You just stayed long enough to remind me what it felt like to be chosen. She came down the last few steps slowly, and I met her halfway. We didn't kiss. We didn't collapse into each other. We just stood there, hands brushing, heads bowed together like we were grieving something sacred and starting something terrifying in the same breath. Over the next few days, the house changed. She moved her things into the master bedroom, slowly, carefully, like the space needed to be earned. The spare room was left untouched, not out of guilt, but reverence. It had held us, protected us, revealed us. I spent time repainting the walls, not because I needed a project, but because I needed to make something feel new. She helped, sometimes silently, sometimes while music played and we passed each other in paint-streaked clothes, smiling when we didn't mean to. We didn't talk about the future right away. We didn't make promises we weren't ready to keep. But every morning I woke up beside her, I felt a little more certain that something real had taken root in all the wreckage. We told people slowly, one by one. There were questions, side eyes. Some friends dropped off completely. Others offered cautious support. It wasn't clean. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. One night, months later, I stood in the doorway of the spare room. It was empty now, bed stripped, walls bare, quiet. She came up behind me, arms circling my waist. You okay? She asked. I nodded, just thinking about how this room was never really empty, I said. It was waiting. She leaned her head against my back. So were we, she whispered.